Hi, and welcome to Week 7, Understanding Wisdom. I'm Dr. Brian Babcock, and this week we're going to be concluding our study on the various genres with a venture into the Old Testament wisdom books. For wisdom, we include Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Without a doubt, these books contain some of the most interesting material in the Bible. Much of the wisdom corpus is straightforward and easy to interpret. For instance, a gossip portrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. That's Psalm 11 or Proverbs 11. Or hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers over all wrongs. Proverbs 10 seems fairly simple to understand. However, numerous passages in the wisdom literature raise questions. For example, Proverbs 22 seems to promise wealth, prestige, and a long life to those who fear God and are humble. It reads, "Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life." Does this teach that a Christian, or that if Christians are poor, either they are not humble or they don't fear God? Does it mean that rich Christians are humbler and more God-fearing than poor Christians? Likewise, the book of Job has some puzzling texts. Look at Job 3, verse 1. "After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth." How do we interpret and apply this verse? Is this to be a model for how we respond to adversity? And if we look at the book of Ecclesiastes, which is a little strange, with all manner of unusual verses, consider the following. "A feast is made for laughter, and wine makes life merry, and money is the answer for everything." And that's Ecclesiastes 10:19. Is the author recommending partying and drinking in the pursuit of money? Obviously, there are some interpretive issues for us to tackle in the wisdom books. By now, you are well aware of how important context is for the proper interpretation of any passage. Indeed, in the examples above, you are probably shouting, "Context, context," as the solution to our confusion over these examples. You're correct, of course, because placing the wisdom literature in proper context will be a critical step along the way to grasping what God has for us in these books. Although the wisdom books are different from the rest of the Old Testament, they clearly play a special role in God's revelation to us. In comparing the wisdom books to the rest of the Old Testament, Derek Kidner makes this comment. In other words, in the wisdom books, the tone of voice and even the speakers have changed. The blunt "thou shalt," thou shalt, or shalt not of the law, and the urgent "thus saith the Lord" of the prophets are joined now by the cooler comments of the teacher and the often anguished questions of the learner. Where the bulk of the Old Testament calls us to simply obey and believe, this part of it summons us to think hard as well as humbly, to keep our eyes open, to use our conscience and our common sense, and to not shrink the most disturbing questions. It is important that we not misunderstand Kidner's quote. He is not denying the intellectual component of the rest of the Old Testament, nor is he denying the spiritual dimensions of the wisdom literature. He is merely observing that the law, the narratives, and the prophets stress the importance of believe and obey, while the wisdom books stress the importance of think. However, just as believing and obeying result in action, the challenge to think likewise results in action. While the wisdom books do not stress the standard elements of the salvation story, covenant, promise, redemption, forgiveness, they do nonetheless assume the theological underpinnings of the rest of the Old Testament. Proverbs 1 verse 7 states, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." The wisdom books start with this theological basis and then use the salvation story as a foundation upon which to build a practical theology for living a day-to-day godly life in a complicated world. The imperatives of the wisdom literature to look, listen, think, and reflect combine to focus on the overarching purpose of these books to develop character in the reader. The wisdom books are not a collection of universal promises. Rather, they are a collection of valuable insights into godly living, which, if taken to heart and to head, will develop godly character, a character that will make wise choices in the rough and tumble marketplace of life. Wisdom literature makes the subtle suggestion that godly living involves solid, common sense choices. Thus, living in a foolish or naive or cynical fashion reflects ungodly living. Wisdom thus has a strong, practical tone. The character to be developed is not a hypothetical or idealistic one, but a real, down-to-earth, common-sense character. Scott summarizes by writing that wisdom has to do with how men and women ought to act in the workaday world with personal character and with a way of life that can be called good because it has coherence, value, and meaning. So wisdom can be defined as that combination of knowledge and character that allows one to live in the real world in a right and godly manner. Thanks for watching, and have a blessed day.